Okay.
Can you tell by the sound of my voice?
Yeah, you sound very enthusiastic.
Like I'm ready to burn a barn.
Like you're ready to burn a damn barn.
I think this show is going to go for longer than we think, and I think it's going to get very spicy.
It could be a barn burner.
A barn burner is like a barn burner,
Bigger.
but bigger. Uh-oh. How did that happen? What did you do?
Me?
Yeah.
I just got here.
It's always your fault. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and don't forget that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Speaking of shows, yesterday we just had another fiery episode of the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert. Pascal pointed his vitriol at the legacy of black fraternities. If you watch the rebroadcast and want to be a part of the live segment of the show, call in or have your questions read on air. There's only one way, and that is to become a patron. It's simple, it's cheap, and it goes a long way to make sure we can continue to bring you the fun yet informative programming you enjoy. With Patreon, you'll get access to all the champagne rooms, past and present, as well as movie nights, the Mau Mau Hour, and more. Also, if you haven't checked it yet, Pascal was a guest on Daniel Bester and David Davidson's American Prestige Pod, giving a very thorough history of Haiti and also giving some context to its current state post the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. Wherever you are listening or viewing, there should be links in the comments or the description to that episode as well. I'm sure super producer MT Toussaint will be dropping some links in the live chat as well. Speaking of MT, let's bring her in to tell you a little bit about the TIR merch. Please welcome the faceless voice of reason, MT Toussaint.
Hello. I'd like to do a host acknowledgement.
What is
I'd like
that?
to acknowledge our host tonight, Jason Miles. Someone has already trashed your fit. I just want to say, you're on your Camilo flow. It's very cold where you are.
It is very cold where I am, and usually I do change, but I went with my neighbor on a dog walk, and it's we're suffering a little bit of the storm that is engulfing Northern California, where we don't have snow here. It is unseasonably cold for February in Mexico, so I apologize for looking like every dad going to the grocery store in the evening. But, sorry.
Kanye would approve.
We don't have insulation in these houses because it's warmer more than it is cold. We have like 2 months a year where it's quote unquote cold. So that's what I have to say. Someone's here. I'm gonna put this comment on the screen. Someone says Jason looks like a homeless New England skater.
Jesus. People. Well, Jason is warm. He just happens to not be wearing the merch tonight. But on other night, when Jason is cold, he wears the hoodies.
Oh,
TIR hoodies. Looking fresh. With the symbol.
I want to
Make
get one of
people
those.
wonder. Yeah, man, I do too.
You know who has the red one?
T-shirt.
Is Marcus from Left Flank Bets has a red one, and he wears it on here.
Yes.
He has the last. He has the last zip up of the red one. He has the last one in existence. We only did one run of those. The smiling faces of Pascal. Cuba on a t-shirt.
Cuba and Jean.
Get Cuba on your mouse pad and have people say, "Who is the scary Eastern European fellow?"
That's right. That's right. And we've got Afro sorry. We have Anglo pessimism.
Anglo pessimism.
Wrong channel.
Please
Wrong channel.
Don't get it twisted. I was at the university where Afro pessimism jumped off, and I was walking around there like the lambdas hit the campus. Revenge of the Nerds. Doom.
Beautiful lambdas.
I was walking around looking for trouble, but I think I was in a different department where those gentlemen. Wow, this is this is officially assault.
What's the cheapest thing you got?
Oh my gosh. Look, we have to bring in the whole crew because this is a whole show. So first and foremost, please welcome co-host, the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Peace and greetings, M2 Son.
Hello.
Pascal coming off a very, very spicy episode of the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert. That will be an audio-only podcast that will drop this Sunday. How do you think he did?
Man, it was a great conversation. Usually the format for the Mau Mau Hour is that I give a monologue for a half hour, then we take questions. We went a full hour, and I really appreciated that Jack kind of pushed back at certain things he disagreed with, and we came to a mutuality of understanding. It was a good dialogue.
And that was the first show you produced, the whole thing. You did everything. That was truly the. Let's give a shout out to that. Truly, the Pascal Robert show. Speaking.
Where's the rest of the bench?
The rest of the bench. We have a deep bench. I'm very proud of the TIR team. Batting second. You know him as everyone's favorite history professor at Missouri State University, Mean Gene Bajlan.
Hello, Jason. Hello, Pascal. Hello, M2 Son. And
hello.
How are you all doing this evening? Are you feeling good?
I'm feeling good because if this was a baseball lineup, I don't know if you're a baseball.
Okay. Don't talk about these American sports. You know.
If this was a cricket game,
no, I don't want to hear about it. You know,
batting third, like my favorite baseball player
okay.
of all time, Will Clark. Deep State Cuba.
Deep State.
Hello. I didn't see you there.
Cuba, long time on the screen before you've been on the screen, man. I feel like it's been a year since we were on the same screen time.
I mean, this feels true, but I felt that everybody would be more comfortable if I limited myself to White Guy Wednesdays. Stayed within the carefully eliminated.
Can I tell the people what you actually said?
Look, can I just make one point here? Just so people know, it is Jason who is implementing this new policy of segregation on TIR. But he assures me all TIR shows they may be separate, but they certainly are all equal.
I'm enjoying the colored flow that Pascal and Toussaint and I have when we do shows together. It's been a lot of fun. And we will continue, of course, to do that. We don't do it on purpose because, as you know, I don't see colors.
It's true.
Batting cleanup.
He's got the eyes of a dog, just no color whatsoever.
No,
and I hate all people equally.
There you go. If you put those two things together, you know what you have? Anti-racism. Speaking of anti-racism, it's everybody's favorite black man. He's batting cleanup like Kevin Mitchell. Let's just go over that 88 Giants roster. Derek Varn.
Who the fuck is Kevin Mitchell?
Kevin Mitchell played right field for the San Francisco Giants and third base, and batted fourth behind Will Clark in the late 80s before Barry Bonds.
I pretty much only know 90s Atlanta Braves baseball reference.
So all you know is Dale Murphy,
Donald Justice.
Dale Murphy. Who played for the Braves? Dale Murphy.
Good potential. A good potential name for White Guy Wednesdays. This is segregation.
So one of the patrons sent me a message, and he said, "Jason, I got an idea for a name." He called it the Alabaster. What did he call it? He called it the Alabaster. I'll have to find it. What did you say?
The Alabaster Disaster.
It was something along those lines.
Pretty good.
It was something along those lines. Yes, Kevin Mitchell was on the 86 Mets. I believe he scored the tying run in that game when they beat the Red Sox to take it to the games.
Thank you for the super chat.
Yes, thank you very much for the super chat. All baseball trivia from 1980 to 1994 will be answered by me. After that, I just don't know.
People are trying to figure out where Cuba is based on his background.
You don't want to know where Cuba is.
Dun, dun, dun.
Or what he's doing.
The Anglo-Pessimist Power Hour. This is a good name for the show. The Anglo-Pessimist Power Hour.
Well, we've created our own separate Facebook chat, which we call White Power Chat. So perhaps.
Why would you say that?
Dude.
I thought it was the White Flower Chat, and you guys were baking. Damn it.
What White Power Chat?
Nah, that's not gonna work.
It's
White Guy
always
Wednesday.
the Kurd who puts the Aryan in the show. That's all we gotta say.
Yeah, but my notion of, as you discovered today, Von, my notion of Aryan supremacy is wildly different from what Americans feel.
Yeah, no one
That's
cares.
true.
Someone says Wiggin with Whitey.
Wiggin with Whitey?
I don't think Wiggin with Whitey is acceptable. I don't think we can do that. I think that is gonna have to be a no. I'm gonna have to veto Wiggin with Whitey.
No, my brother.
Because that just sounds too close. Like, yep.
So like shacking with Sherry.
White boy Wednesdays is what was the joke. Cuba, can I tell people what you said to me when you called?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
Circumstances ever. You may try to clear it with me in the private chat.
Okay. That should have been cracking the fuck up.
50 Shades of Beige.
50 Shades of Beige is awesome.
That's not bad.
I like that.
The Eurasian
How about the Jim
invasion.
Crow corner?
Jim Crow corner. Complete with crows.
Gluten-free Wednesdays is the perfect name for the show.
It doesn't work though, because we have a black person on the show in C. Derek Mann. We have an African who is in perpetual struggle against the state.
You've never seen Derek Varn and Sean King at the same place at the same time, much like Humpty Hump and Shock G.
Exactly.
Sean King is Derek Varn's Humpty Hump. I'm the one that says.
Just grab him in the biscuit.
Just drop him in the biscuit.
This poor man.
Even growing the hair long doesn't help.
No, Vaughn's just preparing to get his dreadlocks in. You know.
He almost choked.
Wow.
The last thing I need is white guy dreads. That is the absolute last thing.
Oh, don't do that.
You got some
the
texture
worst
in there.
thing? What's next to white guy dreads is like the worst thing you can have, Varn? Hemp pants.
Ooh.
Hemp pants.
Birkenstock.
I just want to say before we do this show and we all get canceled that everyone on the screen, despite what people may think, I appreciate everybody on the screen. And I want to say a big thank you for being part of this show with me.
Why are you specifying on the screen? Is that I don't
because
understand.
you are a woman.
No, my
Thanks.
brother.
Okay.
Sugar.
Oh, I was worried that it was going to be an all racisms episode, but we've got one sexism on the board.
Well, that means you too. You're technically on the screen if you were to turn your camera on.
If
I think you should do the show with the MF Doom mask like you did at the live show.
that'd be cool.
That would be dope. I think you should do that every so often.
Every so often, as a treat.
Yeah, you should do that.
Or we could get masks of the rest of us printed for MT. So she'll appear like one other person, and the first 10 seconds of any episode are like, which one's the imposter?
Someone says, Jason, are you dying while in the pointing seat? Every so often, you should always thank the people that work with you. I appreciate everyone that is a part of this show. I cannot do it alone. I need everyone on the screen. I learn from everybody on the screen. So, and that being said, I say that because, and you guys don't know this, because I number the episodes a little differently. We've done over 500 episodes of TIR.
Jesus.
It's a lot of TIR. That's a lot of hot air. Well, let's do it.
October 19th, 2019. It started with one rant about Kanye West.
I don't understand why that guy keeps holding himself back. Let Kanye be Kanye.
In Kanye we trust.
So let's do it. Let's
get into the show, because I know Jean Bajlan has a lot to say about this, and I know pretty much everybody on the screen has a lot to say about this. You know why I know this? Because in our pre-show meeting, which went for like 2 hours, everyone had a lot to say about this. Anti-war / anti-imperialist are labels that get thrown around by many left circles, but are their origins in leftism? Is simply being anti-war a left position? Can anti-imperialism become an inverted form of American exceptionalism? In this current epoch of instant gratification, how does that infect our political visions for the left? To help broaden this discussion, I bring you the entire TIR family. Jean Bajlan.
What's up? Well, yeah. So we're talking about the question of the anti-war movement. And guys, I've been watching some of the mainstream news. As Pascal knows, I listen to MSNBC, though, so that you don't have to. And it is truly a terrible, terrible station. But there was some coverage of this Rage Against the War Machine event that took place in Washington, D.C. And I don't really want to go on about I wouldn't really go on about, like, was it good, was it bad, whatever. There were clearly very different elements there at that event. You had people like Chris Hedges there. You had Tulsi Gabbard. You had Ron. You had Marxist Leninist groups, LaRoucheites, far right people, etc., etc. It was an anti-war.
Can you or Varn quickly explain what LaRoucheites are? Because I think people are saying that, and a lot of people know exactly what.
So LaRoucheites are followers of Lyndon LaRouche, who was a Trotskyist turned. I had no idea how to describe what he turned. He became a pusher of Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracies at one point, and there's been a kind of revival and interest in him, but also that cleans up a lot of his deliberate anti-communist rhetoric. And there was a lot of anti-communist rhetoric coming out of the LaRouche faction in the 80s and 90s in particular. He may or may not have had influence on the Reagan administration by selling the idea of the Star Wars project, although it is unclear how much real effect he had. There are two organizations that have ties to him, explicitly LaRouche Pact and the Schiller Institute. The Schiller Institute itself, it's a big European thing, has actually a fair amount of weird support in China, not from the Chinese government, but from Chinese industries and maybe some things adjacent to the government. Interestingly, like LaRouche Pact people, they do stuff like stop the steal advocacy. Now, when you talk about LaRoucheites online, on the left, you're talking about people who have done Marxist-Leninist LaRouche hybrid stuff, people who talk about mecha communism or MAGA communism, etc.
Eurasianist, like Gumilev kind of Eurasianist, Marxian / Eurasian, pan-Eurasian nationalism combos. But the reason I mention it is because there was a lot of pearl clutching online about people cooperating with right-wing forces. And, I think it's important to be skeptical of certain elements at these anti-war rallies. But what Varn and myself had been discussing about this is that people are getting mad at this anti-war movement for being a red-brown alliance when the anti-war movement has always had this kind of quote-unquote red-brown character to it. Like, people are being mad at the anti-war movement for being what it has always been, which has always attracted elements of the left and elements of the right who, for various reasons, are attracted to war. I think Kuba wants to jump in here.
Yeah. You can think about the Quincy Institute as being the more genteel version of the rally, right? It brings together a lot of scholars from the left that have an unapologetically socialist perspective and project, but there's also isolationists, traditionalists as well. For a while, the Cato Institute was the most anti-war organization that could be cited on mainstream news. Mm-hmm. So the anti-war position is not one over which leftists have any kind of monopoly.
So
One thing I wanted to say is I wanted to ask a question, because just based on my familiarity with LaRoucheites and my experience with them, would it be fair, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, to consider them a form of third positionist?
Well, probably. I mean, the one thing with LaRoucheism is that there's so many things pushed in the LaRoucheite camp that it's hard to actually categorize it as one thing. There are definitely third positionists who are LaRoucheites. There are also Eurasianists who are attracted to it, but there's also just pure anti-communist. And then now you have communists who are back in it too. Its history is wild, it's also, if I'm quite frank, somewhat of a distraction. Like, to get tied up in us talking about like LaRoucheism right now, is to give certain subsections and subquarters of both the internet right and left more credit than they probably deserve.
I mean, if you want to think of a comparison, like, and this is a very loose comparison, he's like someone like Alexander Dugin, in the sense that Alexander Dugin doesn't really have any like original thought, and he's not really a political influencer or innovator. He's just a communicator who has combined various strains of Russian, pseudo-Marxist Eurasianism, elements of Christian fascism, and popularized them, and promoted himself as being the innovator and the inventor, creating a myth. I think Lyndon LaRouche is probably a lot more that kind of person. I don't know, but a lot of these fringe movements, and I say fringe not in a normative sense, but in that they are condemned by the mainstream of politics general, they do attract all kinds of opportunists and political entrepreneurs who are seeking to construct a brand. But of course, at the same time, I think there are people who have like someone like Chris Hedges, whatever you think of him, he was at the rally and he has a strong principled stand against war, and you may or may not disagree with him. So I think it's a little unfair to condemn everyone at the rally as being pro-Russian, but certainly
can I ask you guys this question? And then I want to definitely move on from this LaRouche thing. We just wanted to give a brief explainer. Is the appeal of something like the LaRouche teaching have something to do with, there's so many, much like Alexander Dugin as well, there's so many people that just want to hear a living person talk about Marx?
Well, LaRouche is dead, so.
Oh, that's true.
He died recently, 2 years ago.
And also, there's a lot of whether LaRouche is pro or anti-Marx, it depends on what text and what time period you talked about. The only reason I know so much about this stuff is because my trajectory towards the left is from the anti-war right, and like I've been following people around what would become the Quincy Institute, like Andrew Bacevich, who is a conservative thinker, for a long time, and Bacevich is not even he's hard to classify now.
He's the ex-general guy, right?
Right. Yes, and his son died in the Iraq War. He has become much more even receptive to sort of like left-wing justice arguments on communitarian grounds than he was 10, 15 years ago. But he's written for a whole lot of right-wing publications, and he considers himself a conservative thinker. There's lots of people like that over at Quincy, and there's lots of people like that in the Cato Institute. And I was associated with Justin Raimondo's group, antiwar.com, which was had explicit ties to Pat Buchanan. So like, these are just things that there's a history in the U.S., and that history goes all the way back to the Anti-Imperialism League, and even if you want to go further, to the opposition, the Polk and the Mexican-American War, where the coalitions were mixed. It's hard to even call people before the Civil War left or right, but a mixed group of people. I mean, some of the people who undermined Polk's attempt to take all the way down to Mexico City as part of the settlement of the Mexican-American War, which is what he wanted to do, were virulent racist and later aligned to Confederacy. And the anti-imperialist movement in the Anti-Imperialist League, yes, it had people like Felix Adler or Jane Addams and William Dean Howells, people part of the American liberal left. But it also had people like Andrew Carnegie. Well, I mean, I guess he's woke capital back in the day.
Kind of the definition of it.
The original Scrooge McDuck.
Right. Glover Cleveland. A bunch of former Confederates were part of it.
What about Pitchfork Bill Duggan?
Well, Pascal, you look like you wanted to add something to this.
Yeah, I mean, the larger point here is, and I think it's really important to demonstrate, is that, just to sum it up, is that anti-war, first of all, we need to make a distinction between being anti-war and anti-imperialist. We will get to that at some point. But being anti-war or anti-interventionism has not been exclusively a left political project, particularly in the context of American history, going back to World War I in the 20th century, and even going, back before that. For long periods of time, the right wing or capitalist party was considered to be less interested in intervention, and the Democrats, for example, under Woodrow Wilson, under FDR, under LBJ, under Kennedy, there was a time. I don't. My history doesn't go back that far in American history, but I remember when the saying was, "Democrats start wars and Republicans end them." So Cuba's laughing because I'm sure he's worked around people who actually remember when folks used to say that, because it was kind of the norm, is that it was the Democrats who had this interventionist, internationalist kind of foreign policy, and Republicans who didn't want to pay more taxes, who didn't want to pay for military, were like, I'm not. Why do I?
Let's have more nation building here at home.
Exactly. The typical Pat Buchanan kind of like, let's build our own, economic base, economic factories. We don't need to get involved. And I think a perfect example of how the right embodies that type of thinking is with the contemporary libertarian movement that has long precedent in American politics. If you think about Ron Paul, after 9/11, what exactly puts Ron Paul on the national stage? It was the presidential debate at the Republican primary between him and Rudy Giuliani. And the question was about war and foreign policy. And Ron Paul knocked the question out the park, and then literally gave life to a guy who was a backbencher politically for decades.
And a bunch of young people loved him after that. I remember my younger brother was like, I'm going to vote for Ron Paul.
He was super popular in Georgia amongst both, quote, liberals and leftists.
Do you remember Derek when he went on Morton Downey Jr. show as the left?
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. I mean, people forget that neoconservatism, which people seem to conflate with neoliberalism for good reasons, because neoconservatives are usually neoliberals, but not the reverse is not always true. Neoliberals are not always neoconservatives. Is that neoconservatism were the pro-intervention faction of the Republican Party? A lot of them were either defect. Some of them were Trotskyists. Most of them were Skip Jackson Democrats. And if you don't know what that is, I suggest you look it up. And they flipped sides because they saw, the end of the Cold War as a way to build up this massive industrial, military industrial complex issue. And they mostly have been linked to the Democratic Party from like the 1940s to the end of the 1970s. But even the Democratic Party's, lackluster milquetoast ass response to the Second Iraq War really was opportunistic. And if we forget how many people who, like, A, didn't listen to when Obama said he was pro the Afghan part of that, and B, how many people we had to that were given a pass who became anti-war, in 2003, 2004, but who had been for it just a few months sometimes before, when things looked more, when the mood of the country made it look like there was a large support for the war.
Well, let me just jump in here to give like a little bit of context, because I think we have to like definitely circle back to the historical memory of the anti-war movement leading up to the Obama administration. But I think one thing that people really need to consider is if you look at the paradigms, and perhaps Kuba can speak to this better than I can, but if you look at the paradigm of American foreign policy, particularly during the Nixon administration, that paradigm was primarily driven by a classical realist approach to foreign affairs. And one of the ironies of people posting that video of John Meschmeyer like saying that like actually this is this war is America's fault is that it kind of begs the question about why do we even give a shit about how Russia feels about these things anyway, because Ukraine is not their country. Well, it makes sense from his perspective because he was a neo-realist, and the world was divided into spheres of influence, and you didn't mess too much with one guy with the Soviet sphere of influence, and you definitely made sure if anybody messed around in your sphere of influence, you absolutely pound him. Neo-realists like Meschmeyer, they're pissed off because by going into the Russian sphere of influence, we're annoying them, so we can't have them as an ally against the Chinese, as they see them as the big competitor. But I think there is, especially from the Reagan administration onwards, an injection of ideology, in the sense the belief that the United States doesn't need to be realist, but can impose a particular global order on the world, a capitalist global order. It's not about learning to live with the Soviets, as the realists had told people, as Henry Kissinger had told people, right? Henry Kissinger's like, get used to it because they're going to be there, right? But a belief that you could concretely transform the world through political action and impose your will. And that is the kind of route this kind of route towards this interventionism. Kuba, do you want to jump in?
I think that what you're pointing to is the difference between a foreign policy which is fundamentally grounded on a geopolitical strategy, that is material balances of forces and what planning would look like for an actual conflict, versus one which has this crusader missionary impulse towards transforming and ordering the planet according to some righteous plan. And the pivot does appear to be the Reagan administration, although that was always part of the kind of missionary zeal in the liberal interventionism that you could trace all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. It's almost like Reagan took that perspective and laundered it for the right. And then it turned out that more so than careful geopolitics or any type of fiscal isolationism, you just have the fusion of the war wings of both parties.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about like the realist versus the paleoconservative versus the neoconservative a bit, because I think this is one, there's a conflation often between the paleoconservatives and the realist, and that's like Pat Buchanan and George Kennan are not the same person, and they don't have the same factions in the grand spectrum. But what I think is interesting, and this does relate to the war now, is that in specific, in the relationship to the fall of the Soviet Union, the new American century people and the libertarians actually won out over the George Kennans and the Kissingers and people who thought that, okay, Russia should be immediately incorporated into NATO. And all this. Now the paleoconservative wing of the party at that time had no penchant for war with China the way it kind of does now. And it is interesting because that unites the paleoconservatives with the realists in a way that actually is historically not the case. I was not, when I was in the anti-war right, I had no interest in George Kennan, for example. But I bring all this up because who won in that debacle that began really, it was consolidated under Reagan. It isn't fully consolidated until the end of the George H.W. Bush administration and the way they handle the response to the end of the Soviet Union. And then it is fully consolidated in the foreign policy of Little Bush and George W. Bush, whose reputation on in American liberal circles being rehabilitated is something that truly disgusts me, because even when I was a right winger, I would spit on his picture. That's all I have to say about that.
But yeah, I think that's an important point, is that at least within quote unquote mainstream politics, often liberalism has been at the vanguard of an ideological driven desire to, or at least creating ideological justifications for overseas militarism and expansion, whereas often it was the conservatives who pursued a quote unquote realist strategy, because obviously I think there are profound epistemological problems with the entire preconception of the of realism, but it is a kind of technocratic approach to dealing with like international anarchy.
Well, I think that another way of framing the distinction between the two parties in the past is that the Democrats felt that American global hegemony, American imperialism, required a developmental and universal mission as part of its mandate, while the Republican variant was willing to cut corners. And it's like, look, we've got Germany, we've got Japan. Why are we thinking about some of these other places? We can save money. And we've always had backwaters in, Indian country, if you pardon the expression.
I would argue, though, but at a certain point in the 20th century, post-World War II, we start to see the convergence between the Republicans and Democrats in understanding the importance of the global sphere under Cold War exegesis. That becomes kind of like a bipartisan consensus that, with the newly developing independent post-colonial nations in the global South, that it's bad for capitalism to have Soviet expansion in these markets that can be very profitable and that we're going to need to sell our wares to. So we've got to be able to rehabilitate our image domestically to make sure that we're, IBM and Coca-Cola can do business in, Sri Lanka, the Congo or wherever else. And that's, as we know, and we talked about amongst ourselves, this is part of the whole civil rights exegesis that becomes American diplomatic prerogative number one, and as well. But one thing that I think is important for us, and we're going so fast here, is to talk about the intellectual origins of the intellectual textual origins of left anti-imperialism, i.e. Lenin and precursors, how that materialized in the United States, how the Popular Front was a betrayal of that, and the third part, how the Vietnam War casts this illusion in the mind of Americans to this day that challenging war and imperialism is a left project.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very crucial point. I was going to bring that up because the McGovern and McCarthy campaigns were anti-war, and they get associated with the New Left because of the utter fiasco of the 68 Democratic Convention being what it was. That it kind of hid the fact that the containment was being pushed by this. There's an attempt now by both right wingers and left wingers to try to like use the JFK assassination to to rewrite what JFK was. And JFK really seemed intent on not just proving that he was a cold warrior and was a good, responsible overseer of the military-industrial complex after Eisenhower, but that he would maybe even outdo the military on it, and then seems to have kind of backed away right before his assassination, maybe. Like, there are some hints that indicate that was a possibility, that there was going to be tensions with parts of the Cold War complex there. But that has obscured a lot of this, and I think going back to the imperialism debates in Europe, which have to do with Lenin's stance on national liberation, and then the debates between what would become the Bolsheviks, actually, and Lenin and the Second International, and Kautsky's writings on colonialism, some of which are quite bad. I mean, I'm not going to lie, they're almost pro-colonial. And then you get into the debates between imperialism and ultra-imperialism in response to 1914, when the SPD, under the votes for the war bonds, Kautsky sits on his hands. It's actually a myth that he voted for the war bonds. He didn't. He sat on his hands, though, to not divide the party, as a good democratic centralist, thus allowing for no opposition from the leadership and for it to appear unanimous. He then later leaves the SPD himself, but at that point, he's divided the international movement. Interestingly, the U.S. Socialists, which is part of this international, the Second International, actually make the right vote. They're one of the few. And we can have all kinds of critiques of the SPA and like it being totally, they're being weird racialist and even proto-Nazis and factions of it. They weren't the dominant faction. Don't let anyone convince you of that, but they were there. But that the Americans actually do vote with what the Bolsheviks would say would be the right position, and that actually leads to the stuff that sends Debs to jail. And so this is all tied together, and because of the opposition to the war being tied, first to the socialists, and later when the Communist Party becomes, really after the socialists decline rapidly in the early 1920s, the communists start representing all these interests, and the communists also oppose the war, and then in the end of third periodism, and in the Popular Front, the opposition is dropped to fight fascism, and that puts communists in a weird position in the 1950s and 60s, because we've talked about how the Communist Party of America was really supporting the civil rights movement, was really supporting a lot of like, if you were a black intellectual and you needed a job, the Communist Party would actually help you get that in the 1950s and 60s, and give you, and like often party funds were actually paying for people's salaries. But that put them in a weird position when they're trying to advocate for the civil rights movement and push these people in a front with the Democratic Party during particularly the Kennedy and Johnson administration. So they kind of have to talk in both sides of their mouths in regards to the war, because obviously they can't support the Vietnam War, right? And that's actually that position leads to a lot of the splitting in the Communist Party. That's actually when you start seeing like the Maoists leave, and the Revolutionary Communist Party, that we now associate with Bob Avakian, although he didn't found it, was born from this time period. It leads to a bunch of splits that causes the Communist Party USA to decline in size. I think in 1947, it's 75,000 people, which per capita is larger than any socialist movement other than the SPA in like 1914. So the second largest socialist movement in U.S. history. particularly when you adjust for population size. And by like 1975, it's like 5,000 people. So the collapse is kind of huge over the anti-war stuff and trying to figure out how they deal with the fact that the Popular Front puts them in league with a party fighting a war against communists in Vietnam. And also, like, this gets even more accelerated and confused when you have Nixon in a brilliant bit of realpolitik accelerate the Sino-Soviet split by reaching out to China. So
Cuba?
those two things,
Good
Cuba,
analysis, Warren.
go for it, Coops.
I don't really think that there's much to add there. That the Vietnam was a watershed, and not just for the creation of this myth of the anti-war left and the breakup of any kind of trans-sectarian unity in the American left, but also the failure of that war creates what's called Vietnam syndrome, this alleged condition of hesitancy and reluctance to use force in the part of American military leaders, especially the uniformed staff. But what it actually does is create a 10, 20-year opening for the reform and technological transformation of the United States military away from what was still a conscript-based force in Vietnam to a smaller, much more professional, much more lethal, much more technologically driven force. In some ways,
much less politically accountable.
Much less politically accountable. In a lot of ways, from purely the perspective of military technology, doctrine, techniques, it was defeat in Vietnam that forced a generational change, the creation of again a new model army and a new paradigm for global militaries. And we find ourselves in like the end game of that technological condition, because the edge that being the first to transform that way offered the United States, together with its overwhelming geopolitical position, is no longer available. You don't have the same concentration of force in a single state, and a more multipolar distribution of power will get you a more challenging environment in which to try to maintain some kind of imperial hegemony.
Well, I want to kind of fast forward to
actually let me just pick up on one thing there, and this is also when it's in that kind of environment that arguments against U.S. intervention in a particular war, or as a categorical principle, might play in to the expansionist imperial regional ambitions of other actors. And I recall when, as late as the 2008, 2012, if you were anti-war, the worst that anybody could say about you is you were a David Kucinich type patsy, a hippie, a loon.
Dennis Kucinich.
Dennis Kucinich, yes, sorry. A beta cuck, if you will, a soy boy. And now, since the entry of Trump into politics, it's become a matter of treason, right? You have accusations all the time. This person's working for the Russians. This person's working for the Chinese. How much Assad money are you getting? And I think that reflects not just a change domestically, in U.S. politics, but also the dawning realization that other countries can and do push back in this international environment. And there very well may be attempts by them to do exactly the type of hearts and minds work that was the pride and joy of the United States throughout the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, you get hearts and minds yourself. Well, one thing I wanted to kind of focus on was to circle back to was the anti-war movement during the Bush administration, because I think especially for people of my generation, that was an extremely formative political experience for us, and I definitely think some I mean, I assume in the United States, though, it seems to have cemented this view that the anti-war, the anti-war position was a left position, and that what's going on now with this current coalition of left and right forces is something atypical. But it strikes me that you had those same people back in the day doing, Alex Jones, Pat Buchanan. They were at those rallies. The difference between that period, however, is I think the Iraq War was very easy to oppose, right? It was just like naked imperial aggression, right? That's why Obama was opposing the Iraq War and not the Afghanistan War, where you could make an argument that, the Afghans harbored someone who attacked us, and to a normie, that sounds reasonable. But Iraq just couldn't be made to sound reasonable. And so you had like a vast influx of anti-Bush liberals into this movement that kind of swamped the core constituency of it. And I think, like Rachel Maddow was attacking the Rage Against the War Machine rally. But that's because these things get used for internal party political issues, right? This rally now, the anti-war movement is seen as being beneficial to the Republican Party, whereas in 2006, the anti-war movement was co-opted by the Democratic Party and eventually the Obama campaign, who were able to delude people into thinking that Obama's position was a principled anti-war position, when in fact Obama's position was a disagreement over imperial strategy, and more specifically his desire to reorientate military and political forces towards combating China, an effort which ended in disaster as he was dragged back into the Middle East with the rise of ISIS, and ended in humiliation with TPP being dumped at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. So
absolutely, let's not forget that Obama actually killed the anti-war movement that was burgeoning under Bush as well.
Well, we got a super chat.
A super chat from Chris Morlock. We had people at the rally successful enough to get national coverage. Worst opponents were the Trots, who monopolized the quote-unquote anti-war brand. The State Department socialists haven't mentioned this.
Well, maybe
Sassy.
I can kind of address that obliquely, picking up off of Gene and Pascal's comment about the demobilization of the anti-war movement by Barack Obama. I remember it was actually kind of an eerie parallel to George W. Bush telling people that if they wanted to support the war in Iraq and the fight against terror, they should just go shopping to the mall. And similarly, after Obama's election, rather than maintaining the organizations that had delivered his votes as pressure mechanisms that could have been used against the party or against Republicans, those groups were just wound down or folded into the standard Democratic Party apparatus. And I think that, but Gene was pointing out that there was an influx of these anti-Bush liberals into the anti-war movement. The interests of the Democratic Party and the anti-war movement they aligned around getting rid of George W. Bush, since the war in Iraq was so heavily personalized around him. But once Obama's in power, then from the Democratic perspective, well, the interests change. And the same people who came in opportunistically and often got promoted within organizations because they could deal with the Democratic Party. They could get resources. They could tell you who to mobilize for. They had the glamour of success and access on them. Well, some of them got pulled into the apparatus. Some of them got pulled into the Obama White House. And the rest of them went home, leaving organizations more hollowed out than buttressed.
Thoughts, Vaughn?
One of the things I have to say about this is that when we talk about these scenarios, we often don't mention where the working class is, because I'm going to say something that's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, but they're not relevant. And not because what the working class thinks doesn't matter, but because they have absolutely no effect on foreign policy. And that's been true of all these protest movements too, although to some degree in the Vietnam War, you do have a real ability to affect the war machine in a real way, because there are so many conscript working class members of the army, which they made sure, and they being the military industrial complex, never happened again. Right? Like the movement, and this was supported by libertarians too, which makes any particular governmental faction, like trying to tell the story of like the pro and anti-war movement through the factions of American politics leads to all kinds of incoherence. You have Trots and Maoists supporting different sides of the same conflicts at different times, and I could go through the specific organizations, but I don't feel like it's worth the time. You have a massive anti-war movement in the United States, which has massive rallies the size of which we have not seen since then. And I mean this in the 2000s. The largest rally technically probably that ever happened in the United States was against the Iraq War, and I believe it was in 2006. It mattered nary a bit. But people were able to feel like that there was an elite sea change that was favoring them in an anti-war position. And I'll give you an example of that. Neil Ferguson, Mr. America is not imperialist enough. It needs a colonial department so it could be a proper imperialist, endorsed Barack Obama and turned against him in 2012. And I mean, he's British, who fucking cares what he wants. But in 2008, he supported him, and it seemed clearly that there was a large faction of the military industrial planning complex between the UK and the US who wanted to make sure that they had a scapegoat for what happened in the Iraq War.
I think that's really an important point. I think a lot of quote unquote anti-war people, for the best of reasons, get duped by people or misunderstand people when they are anti-war, and that like their anti-war position may not be one based on principle, but maybe based on disagreement of imperial tactics. Like, for example, people lauding Tulsi Gabbard as an anti-war activist, war on terror, literal soldier. Tulsi Gabbard is a peacenik. No, Tulsi Gabbard has a different idea for what American imperial policy should be. So, she opportunistic. She, as a political opportunist, she uses the anti-war movement for her political ends. The right wing of the Republican Party that is, complaining about this war and saying we shouldn't be fighting in Ukraine, their issue is not American imperialism per se, but they have a difference of opinion on what American imperial strategy should be. Ergo, they use the anti-war movement. So the anti-war movement, just as the Obama administration, the Democrats used the anti-war movement, up to Barack Obama's election. So too, don't be surprised that elements of the political right during a Democratic administration are going to make use of the anti-war movement to buttress and support their own domestic political agenda, as well as their own pet projects in American imperial policy.
Well, the one question that we could introduce to sort of divide the part of the right that's or other incumbents like Tulsi Gabbard that oppose the conduct of U.S. imperialism is, as opposed to its very foundation, is that question, like, to what extent and how do these different political orientations feel that the U.S. must govern the planet? The one reason why Neil Ferguson could endorse somebody like Barack Obama is because of the bipartisan, transatlantic, cosmopolitan, neoliberal. It's not even a conspiracy. It's just an open agreement, an intellectual confluence towards a neoliberal internationalist order with the United States at its apex. Obama believed in it. So even if it might be the military might be less well fed under his administration, or a particular conflict might come to an end, at least it's a safe pair of hands, unlike, say, Bernie Sanders or, as we saw later, Donald Trump.
Can I ask us to maybe deal with, however, the anti-imperialism arguments? Because one of the things I've been very frustrated with about the Marxist left is that there are about 5 different theories of anti-imperialism that you have that come after Lenin. You have Lenin, the Lenin-Bukharin hybrid position that also ties in a little bit of like the non-Marxist Hobbes critique of imperialism, Hobson critique of imperialism. But you also have, and ties in parts of Hilferding too. But there's also a sense in which, like, after Lenin dies and after World War II, there are lots of different theories around imperialism. For example, in the Chinese Communist Party in the 1920s, you start having discussions about anti-imperialism of class versus proletarian nation status. All right. And they base this off of, very loosely, admittedly, off of Lenin's arguments around national liberation. And sometimes that gets brought in. So you have like third worldists who will revive some of these arguments. Now, I'm not saying this to discredit that argument, but I will actually say the other people who made proletarian nation arguments were literally the Mussoliniite fascist for Italy. So it's just something to note that was also used by fascist anti-imperialists. And yes, even though all the fascists had imperialist aims, they explicitly did. I mean, what do you think Germany was trying to do to Central Europe, but imperialize it and kill all the Slavs, and after they got rid of all the other undesirables that they were after. It's also pretty clear that they also used anti-imperialist rhetoric. There's a meme that goes around about the American imperialism. That's actually a Nordic Nazi poster that sometimes gets shared by people who don't realize what they're sharing. And it has.
But is it cool?
It is cool. It has like a Klan member with like Uncle Sam over here, and then some clearly miscegenated people, but also has an anti-slavery thing going on there. But it was actually fascist propaganda. So when you ask yourself, like, what kind of theories are we dealing with the anti-imperialist stuff? A lot of people just throw out a whole bunch of gobbledygook that they've slammed together, like misunderstanding Lenin's revolutionary defeatism argument, and slamming that in with third world, the developing nations, or what was then called third world patriotism argument, or then also tying that maybe into the non-aligned movement. And people move often in leftist circles because they're undereducated about their own history and don't really know that there are profound differences and debates around this post-Lenin. That they're moving rapidly between these different conceptions that are actually mutually exclusive a lot of the time. So we can talk about how when we talk about anti-imperialism, you start asking people what they think that means, you'll get radically different answers, even from people who are nominally the same sect and ideology.
Well, I'll be very, very honest. One of the reasons I think that happens, particularly in the American left, is because everyone is sucking the tit of empire in America, and there's no skin in the game. That's why I watch a lot of foreign policy, and I speak about foreign policy in terms of one specific place generally, and that is Haiti. Why? Because I understand how imperialism has historically worked regarding that particular country for over a century. That doesn't mean I don't understand how imperialism works anywhere else. What it does mean is that I don't want to fall into the trap of making analyses based on political trends and ideology simply because I'm spouting rhetoric divorced from the actual material history and space in order to fit an ideological trend that's stuck in 1972, or because I got a hard-on reading Frantz Fanon.
Yeah. Well, I think if we ask ourselves like how imperialism works today versus the way that Lenin describes it in 1917, you have a very different image. And I think Lenin was right about the world he described in 1917, but like that's not the way things operate today. It may be returning back to that. Maybe that's a consequence of multipolarity, unquote. If you're going to use British 19th century and early 20th century British geopolitical thinking as your grounds for understanding modern political economy, go ahead, because that, by the way, is the origins of that phrase.
It could also very well just be the decay of the system. Just as you see a decay in the physical infrastructure and the networks that maintain global capitalism. The toxic cloud over East Palestine, Ohio, is just the most current illustration. You also have the decay of the mechanisms and structures of American global power projection and influence. And that creates openings for other countries, potentially. It may also just be a process of weakening any type of pan-territorial governance.
I mean, that's the thing, the advocates of something like multipolarity, it's like it's basically rolling the dice. Their whole theory is that, well, if you break down imperial power of the United States, that will create opportunities for the growth of socialism, which strikes me as being a very big leap of faith. But as Cooper says, it would lead to it could lead to just the general degeneration of any system of global governance. It could just lead to a new neo-realist
every country
world.
is Somalia.
Yeah, or no, you just end up with a new set of countries with spheres of influence and a balance of power. Go ahead, Pascal. Sorry.
Frankly, I think that we're all just taking too many deep scenarios. At best, it might get you a better contract in terms of who's going to build the bridges in your third world backward country.
Exactly, Pascal. I mean, like, this is, and also like advocating something that seems to be happening organically is like advocating for rain. I mean, it's good that, I guess, that you get rain, but your advocation of it is kind of fucking irrelevant, isn't it?
Yeah, the clouds aren't
There
going to
is
rain
no-
harder.
Listen, there is no ideological counter-capitalist project on the world stage being projected with pending multipolarity.
No, there isn't.
All right? China is not going into Africa saying, my friend, have you read Das Kapital?
Which the Soviet Union actually did. And even China did back in the day.
The Soviet Union, quite frankly, not only did that, but they provided guns and weapons to fight the imperialists and the colonial empires. Those days are gone, man.
Yeah, they are.
Those days are gone. The best you're going to get is you're going to get some countries in the global south and the African continent who might be able to get a better, development deal from the Chinese, a better weapons deal from the Russians to fight, the AFRICOM forces that the U.S. is sending over, and it's going to go from there. Where I have the problem is that once, particularly the Russians and the Chinese, are going to try to expand, but in the African continent, because it's so resource rich, under the guise of development deals and more weapons, the United States is going to double down in terms of its AFRICOM expansion agenda, and the new developing terrain for this military conflagration is not going to be Ukraine. It's going to end up being, Congo, Nigeria, you name it, wherever else. Not that it's bad. It's not bad that it's Ukraine now. It might be Ukraine and.
Yeah.
I mean, we still haven't settled the war in Ethiopia fully. There's plenty of conflicts available to metastasize into those great power proxy fights, and there's plenty to fight over. One interesting test of the Ukraine war will be to see if this model of kind of franchise warfare, where one state, the local state, does all of the dying, but the superpower bloc does all of the funding and supplying, whether that's a workable model. If so, then we're off to the races. It's just a matter of who NATO might be able to find to fight its particular baddie of the month.
We have a super chat here from JB. Thank you, JB, very much. China sending Huawei into nations to build cyber infrastructure, and the cost is do business with China. Is it as simple as that?
Well, I don't know if that's a cost, because either do business with China or do business with the IMF. Which shark do you want to bite you?
Yeah,
I think the perception is that China is not the shark. Would you guys agree?
China does not do explicitly, and actually under anti-imperialist logic. I know this is going to sound strange, but explicitly and under anti-imperialist logic, China does not do freebies. It will, but it has been generous in renegotiating debt. The statements of debt traps have been greatly exaggerated by the liberal media. You're not getting me to take a particular anti-Chinese position, but it is not the same as what the Soviets did at all.
No, it's business, because if you're like a new, it's simply business, because if you're you're trying to get into a new market, you go in and you try and offer a better deal than the existing people who are dominating that market, which is the United States and France. And so the Chinese,
mostly France, really, in Africa, but yeah.
Go ahead.
Huawei has a superior 5G product, period. Right?
Yeah, it does.
If we're accepting any notion of consumer choice or market competition, Huawei is cheaper and better. Why is anybody anywhere using anything else for their 5G networks? And the reason is that it comes embedded with the opportunity for surveillance, espionage, etc. The Americans are already doing that on every other platform and system. Good luck having a secure conversation on an iPhone.
Would you call Huawei a co-op, Kula?
Like, I'm not going to look into the internal governance of Huawei to make like a technical decision on that. All I know is that the leader is still a billionaire.
My position is that from the perspective of global South countries, the option of dealing with the Chinese does provide luxuries that did not exist before, when your only option was dealing with your 100%. Former colonial power or the IMF or the World Bank.
And the Chinese, like, honestly, in Africa, their biggest enemy is themselves, in that they keep their deals secrets. Like a lot of the deals that they have, the terms are not made public. The terms are usually pretty good. They're a lot better. Now, China, when operating in an international market, they play by international rules anyway. So there are limitations on the kinds of deals that they can engage in. But A, the Chinese are out there making money. And B, unlike the West, when our industrial capacity became inconvenient for the ruling class, they wound it down. The Chinese, after a massive phase of construction, they're now exporting their capacity, the construction capacity, their technological know-how. So at the same time as doing this developmental aid, they're also paying their own people to maintain the skills and maintain their construction and technology center, which seems like a smarter thing to do, to be honest.
I think we all agree that at this particular state of perceived economic precarity in the United States, where the traditional notion is that America wants to be the zero-sum game victor in global capitalism, the notion that the Chinese become the global international trader of record that is moving to eclipse the United States is going to be unacceptable.
Yeah. I mean,
well, we have another super chat here that it looks like it's an angry one. And you can send angry super chats if you really want to.
If you really want to.
If you really want to, I'm all for it because I think it's kind of funny. But if you want to do that, I mean, go for it.
No one.
China charges 2% on loans without modification. Stop obfuscating. The devil is in the modifications, even if the IMF loan is 1%.
Nothing in that statement contradicts a goddamn thing I said.
No, it reinforces everything we just said.
Yeah. The Chinese
none of us are particularly anti-Chinese.
Cuba better not be anti-Chinese.
Jesus.
No, in fact, everything I've studied on the deals with China, the deals tend to be very good. They tend to be fair. Like, they're just secret, and they're secret probably for international competition reasons, because they don't want the IMF under.
Derek, this is what I was trying to get at with this whole show in general. There is a good guy, bad guy perception with the world.
Well, I mean, if that's what gets people up at night, if they want to throw money on a super chat so they can mock people because they have that kind of money to waste, good on them. No, I don't know what they think they're doing.
But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, do you guys agree that there's a good guy, bad guy perception of the world?
Yo, it's about business, man.
Yeah. But people like to transform all political narratives into a Marvel movie or the latest storyline in the WWE, where you can concretely find a good guy and a bad guy. Sometimes there's no good guy and bad guy, and you don't need to fall for the double blackmail, right?
Can we actually, like, for a second though, I do get a little bit annoyed with these facile psychologicalizations of people, because in some ways we have no idea. I don't know anyone's heart and mind. I'm not going to pretend to. I do get kind of offended when people like pretend I'm a fucking Fed and I have reacted strongly to people for less. But there is something that really misses the point here. Like, I could make a revolutionary defense of China, and yet also admit that this is nothing like what the Soviet Union did in the 1950s and 60s in regards to the developing world. I'm not even sure that what the Soviet Union did ended up paying off that much for the Soviet Union, frankly.
Or some of the countries.
Are the countries in which, and the countries in which it armed and led revolutionary movements because of what happened later. Like, I'm just stating that if you're making comparisons, they need to be deeper than like fair business practices. Of course, the West isn't giving anyone, like, fuck, the West isn't even giving Europe any more fair business practices. Like,
bro, the Western governments won't even bribe their own population with, like, goodies. It's like they won't even get. They won't even even bribe you with social democracy. Yeah. It's like, come on, man. You think that offering the goodies to everybody else around the world? No, they're terrible. But yeah, I mean,
but there is a sense in which you, like, if you want to compare what China did with the Belt and Road Initiative, it is a way that resembles what the U.S. tried to do, specifically with the Europeans, and building up a global capital infrastructure out of what was left of the English imperial, control over the oceans. And I actually think if they had gotten more of it off the ground before all these crises hit with COVID, the world would be a better place. You're not getting any argument from me about that. But that's not particularly relevant to imperialism or anti-imperialism. And if we are honest, like, if you read, like, if you're basing your definition of imperialism off of what Lenin said, for example, it is not clear that any of these powers aren't doing what Lenin said they would do. All right. And that would imply then, if we operate off of this notion that Lenin is our standing grounds for this, and I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, because we're in a completely different context. I'm just saying, if we're being consistent here, like, then some of this looks like inter-imperial squabbling, frankly, and that's exactly what imperialism, the highest state of capitalism, would have predicted. Now, I would argue that we live in a different world, and that some of those things that were very true in a revolutionary situation and a world crisis from 1914 to 1945 may not be true anymore. And we have to come up with our own analysis of it. But if you're going to invoke that analysis, you better goddamn be consistent about it.
Well, the point about the point about the good guy bad guy narrative, I wouldn't say it's a psychological argument per se, but I think people at least have, popular culture, the way people view society, the thing. Like, look, NATO was literally on the official NATO Twitter. They were making references to Thanos and the Harkonnens and all these, all these popular countries. And I'm not going to be a snob about it and say, like, I don't like the first Iron Man movie. I thought it was quite good. I enjoyed the Dune movie, no problem. But I do think a lot of anti-imperialism in the West ends up just being a simple inversion of, like, the American inceptionist argument. Like, instead of America being uniquely innocent and always having in its heart the right thing to do, America is uniquely evil, which misses the point that states are amoral. Like, it's not like you could make the argument that, like, Barack Obama or, like, the United States is responsible for ISIS in a broad sense by creating certain conditions which led to the rise, or accelerating certain conditions. But if you freaking think Barack Obama was sitting there, like, freaking planning to, establish a caliphate in Mosul so that they could do some 10-dimensional chess that would end up with the Iranians becoming the preeminent power in Iraq, then you've been hitting the crack pipe too much. And you basically have just bought into a secularized version of the the protocols of Zion, right? Like just as the Protestant ethic gets shorn of its Protestant part, you end up with like anti-Semitic conspiracy type thinking, just in a secularized version, rather than thinking about what. Yeah,
and you can imagine the 2x2 matrix of like the inversion of American exceptionalism domestically and politically, and the domestic variant is woke culture, anti-racism, etc. You can be a good liberal as long as you've got at least one box ticked. So anti-imperialism can be your virtue, which then lets you continue to believe in American democracy, or you can be hyper woke internally to the United States, and you can back up NATO expansion and mission civilisatrice.
That's so
occasionally.
true.
Pascal, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I mean, my position is that, for people who are like America is uniquely bad, how would you feel if you lived in Great Britain? I mean, my position is that, like, America is bad, Great Britain is bad, France, for me, is going to be worse than all of them for various historical reasons. But yeah, America has, 800, 900 military bases. Yeah, at scale, America has the capacity for destruction. But all these bastards are bad.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points I want to come back to about whether or not this is like some psychological projection, and there's some inverted American exceptionalism, or that people think they know a lot more than they can fucking possibly know because they got it off of a stream from someone downstream of, I don't know, someone who went to a Croton Brisk or something. The reality of the situation is most of the people talking have at best quadritertiarily away information, and most of us only have secondary or tertiary information. But I have lived in a lot of the places that people talk about so much and they seem to care about so much, even though they don't seem to know much about its actual real lived situation. One of the things I think people need to get over, and this is when I talk about analysis, it's a different thing than when I'm talking about who you should accept as allies. Like, if you have to deal with an anti-war coalition and you think they're all going to be good leftists, I hate to tell you, you're a fucking moron. And if that's your demand, that is actually kind of a moronic demand. The idea that any political program could be hatched perfectly cleanly and purely before people got involved with it and everybody would be on board is a facile notion of how politics works. And I think with that, we have to realize that sometimes there's going to be people on our side that have bad motives, right? Like, just like we can completely see plenty of people whose internalization of whatever norms, because of the way things have rolled out in Ukraine, think that they can also like take neoconservative talking points about Ukraine and it still somehow be okay because Putin is, responsible for Russiagate and leading a right-wing conspiracy around the world. Furthermore, the idea of projecting like leftism onto Putin's government seems to be fundamentally unserious too. We can seriously talk about it in terms of China, but I do not think you can seriously talk about it in terms of Russia. But supporting supporting either side of this situation based off purely people have been saying that for 20 fucking years. I'm responding to the U.S. lose its status as the world's dominant reserve currency. The quickest currency being replaced by the yuan right now is the euro. And look, it would be great if, well, actually, it wouldn't be great. the people who listen to heterodox economists who have told them a lot of things that they want to hear, and haven't looked at the actual flows of currency and money and the dollar.
We have a super chat. Chris Morlock says the war of imperialisms is an ESC button.
What from living?
You know, this is how you know this is a show, because if we were an actual political movement, we'd have to 1936 some people because they're a distraction.
1936, is that your Mau?
Don't make Sarah come in with the snip snaps. What happens?
You guys,
what happens
made
to
Pascal go away. Pascal disappeared.
Where did he go?
I think his Wi-Fi went out.
It was.
I think he heard Varn starting to 1936, and he had to be like, "Wait, where's my dossier for today?
Look, you know,
what did the commissar say about me last time?"
It's white guy. It's white guy Thursday. The white purge wins.
When people talk about the decline of dollar hegemony, that's inevitable too. There's going to be no world currency that's that stable for that long. But the way that it's been predicted to happen so far, everybody I've seen that's predicted something, such as BRICS taking over magically because somehow India and China are going to be on the same team all of a sudden because reasons, that technically involve their mutual support for Russia, but ignores their own internal divisions within themselves, and the fact that U.S. business has been leading heavily on moving a lot of its production from China into India, and a lot of developing market investment has been going that way as well, thus splitting up any BRICS coalition. That is stuff you guys need to be much more realistic about when you talk about this, and not just project. Yes, the U.S. dollar is going to first get stronger and probably get weaker. All right. But that, again, that's like talking about rain again. Those patterns are patterns of capital, and if you think that the world reserve market's going to be super open to a fucking socialist country currency, just so it can continue capitalist trade, you really need to think some things through. There's a lot of this that frustrates me because it pretends knowledge that people just do not seem to be willing to invest in having. And this is knowledge that you can't just get from a stream. Like when we talk about the nature of, say, someone asked him about the nature of whether or not such and such business is a co-op. There's about 80 different forms of state-run organizations in China that have different internal organizations, some of which I can't even find out about in the West. And I'm not assuming anything nefarious about that. It's just not been anything that anyone's covered in English. And I guess I could go really dig into China's own public stats and try to figure that out if it's public information, which it may not be. So when you pretend to know these things, when you don't, it's a major credibility problem. When we talk about what's going on in the developing world, I can tell you from living in North Africa, attitudes around China were that China was the future, but that maybe people shouldn't trust it. All right. No one trusted the Americans when I was in North Africa because they're, actually weirdly, I've talked about this in the past. People just thought that Obama betrayed any potential mission that they saw in him themselves, that they were even kind of the average Egyptian was actually kind of pro-Trump because they thought that they could at least trust Trump's position. But there you go. So there's a whole lot that we could talk about here, but when it comes to like the anti-war movement, there's a very serious sense in which, like, one, we have to be realistic about how the changes in the structure of the military has limited public's opinion to do anything about it. And two, in so much that we do think public opinion can do something about it, expecting it to be purely anti-imperialist or definitely purely leftist or even, aligned with any singular goal is just an immature thought. And people will use that to their advantage. And by people, I mean, people who support NATO. It is important to understand the institutional history of the anti-war movement is not consistently on either side of the political ledger. But yeah, that's my.
I mean, I think that's an important thing to say. There's always the question of like who's using who. So if people are going to be anti-war and that aligns with your interests, that's cool. But just make sure they're not the ones calling the shot and then liquidating you into their political movement. You want to be doing the other way around.
Well, asking people in America to stay independent from dominant political movements seems to be something
pissing in the wind.
Yeah, it just seems to be something that no one will even consider, because as soon as they realize that you're tailing the Democrats, the response is, let's go tail the Republicans.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead, Kuba. Sorry.
No, plenty of Americans stay completely independent of any kind of political engagement. Dropping out is the ultimate disaffiliation.
Yeah, a lot of people.
I wouldn't say wrong either.
There's a lot of Americans who don't like politics, and a hell of a lot of Americans who can't stand foreign policy or don't understand it or don't care enough to watch it.
No, I mean I don't blame people. We after this moment, the failure of the DSA, Jacobin, Sanders strategy to get some childcare and some help. After that failure,
can't the imperialists bribe us? Like I always, the Maoists used to tell me they did that. I would love that bribe.
Oh yeah, bribe me. I would bribe me now. But after that's failed, I think we're going to see the rise of a lot more sectarian groups. But I think the main thing is people are just going to check out of politics because they ain't got time for it anymore. Because they're just going to be like, it doesn't work. Why do I even bother?
Well, it's just like the news, right? People haven't really checked out of the news because now there's a new angle to the way we look at politics, which makes it an enjoyable back and forth, drama-filled fight. So
that's true. I mean,
that's what this all is for a lot of people is a drama-filled fight.
Always got to be a twist for the coming season.
Yeah.
There's going to be a huge reveal. X turns out to be a fascist. Woo.
No, George W.'s coming back as a white hat.
Yeah, white hat. No,
it's going to be Biden Bush, 2024.
Oh, that would be
wow.
That would be the best.
Oh, only in a movie. Only in a movie.
We should make that movie.
And they're going to end up personally negotiating peace with Putin. Well, Vladimir, I'll look to your ass.
Marvel twist.
I know there's a good man still in there.
Giga Chad Bush. Yeah, let's bring back Bush. What about Bush Clinton 2024? Pascal.
And they get married at the DNC.
Chelsea Clinton, and they enter in a polygamous Mormon marriage. How about that?
Can we talk about the reality of the deep state for a second? Instead, in a real sense, because one of the things that I think was missed during this whole recapitulation about Trump was that there was a kind of paleo-conservative realist faction in the Trump administration that was all purged by 2018, almost to a man, and replaced with
didn't make it.
Yeah, or our what's his face?
Bolton.
not Bolton, but I was about to say the person that Bolton replaced, who was like an old business conservative who was very openly war skeptic. I can't remember his name. Yeah, Rex Tillerson. Yeah, I mean, like those people were all purged, and then we saw neocon faces. We see the little Bolton stash come back, and even in the attempts to realign and take a more anti-war position within the General Chiefs of Staff, which Trump tried to do in the best of his ability, they were still largely in support of consensus security, positions. I mean, and that's even from people like, quote, Mad Dog Mateus, who apparently hated Trump's guts, but Mateus was known for being less hawkish in the military industrial regime before he took the position. But notice I said less. He still thought we needed to like pivot and have a strong response to Iran. He was still part of the long going pivot to Asia. By the way, the pivot to Asia goes all the way back to Samuel fucking Huntington. If you go back and read the Clash of Civilizations, like he wasn't the rebranding of that book as about like Islamic terrorists is actually a retrojection onto the book. Like most of that book is about them being afraid of like the Asian cultures and actually think even mostly Japan, weirdly. But like that whole like, oh, we need to stop worrying about the Middle East because eventually we'll get this whole energy crisis thing fixed and start pivoting to Asia for geopolitical reasons. That's like a long durée project that plenty of people in the new American century have believed in, right? I mean, like that definitely goes back to Obama, but there's a faction.
Liz Cheney has been on that beat since she's like, no, why are we doing the war on terror was like a total distraction, a total debacle. And there were a lot of people just like, why are we doing this? Why are we, this is not, we need to be, preparing to fight the Chinese, not running around in the sand doing nation building for people's kind of largely delusional projects of how they could project American power through shaping reality. Because imperialism, the problem with a lot of the conspiratorial views of imperialism, it like attributes way too much competence to the instruments of American political power. Don't get me wrong, you've got people who were capable intelligence operatives who were capable of doing things, but like the vast manipulation of global affairs by the United States, it's less a manipulation, it's more of like surfing the wave, or like managing the crisis, or like trying to push things into your direction while your colleague is unknowing to you pushing things in another direction because he also wants the promotion. Because this whole conspiratorial view of American hegemony around the world is like, like it seems like so like everybody seems to think the CIA is like run by gigachads, and it's like, my bros, it's run by Mormons.
No, it's just gigasads.
Gigasads.
Actually, there is kind of a State Department preference, particularly in Middle Eastern policy for people around the LDS Church. When some of my former right-wing colleagues used to call it the MQ, the Mormon question.
What was the Mormon question? I want to know about the Mormon question.
Well, the answer was no caffeine.
Yeah. The Mormon question was what are we good Catholics and Protestants going to do about the Mormon infiltration of the State Department?
Like the CIA is Mickey Mouse in terms of foreign intelligence now. Now it's the Department of Defense, NSA. Those are the big boys. Now nobody takes the CIA seriously when it comes to espionage. Now, I mean, they're all like I want someone to make that cartoon, like a skit where
that woman who was like, I have like anxiety disorder, Latina CIA agent. Like, and Jack Ryan's like, I need an effing extraction right now. And she's like, you're really stressing me out with your tone. I'm having
your tone is causing me.
Well, Kuba has to leave now. Kuba, thank you for hanging out with us. And
I got a
your
call from
mom's
Jack
here.
Bauer.
You got
I will have mom.
Like,
apparently
whoever was supposed to pick him up has got some kind of panic attack because he saw something mean on a podcast. So I have to go.
Jack Bauer is code for your mom. Your mom's here.
Your mom's
here to get you.
Mom's here, guys.
Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Tell the
Kuba.
missus we said hello. I can turn my camera back on now. Bam! Ah!
He exists.
I do exist. I've just been responding back to people extremely hilariously in the chat.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vaughn.
Was that the only time, Toussaint, you wanted to time me out?
Not the one time, but the most recent time. For sure, the most recent.
I want to say something more again about the capacity of American intelligence. I think it's a project of diminishing return, in that when America was kind of the fulcrum of hegemonic power, particularly after World War II, and the days of the Dulles brothers, when we could take out Mossadegh, whack Patrice Lumumba, things of that nature. The glory days when you weren't dealing with, counter hegemons like the Chinese coming around, when the Soviets were predictable because, they were working on a certain exegesis of, okay, we're trying to expand, the influence of communism, and the expectations were kind of easily maintained. I think it was a much more facile way of pushing buttons internationally. I think what happens in the period of the post-fall of the Soviet Union, particularly in the period of neoliberalization with the rise of Nixon going into Carter, and once they start to get into places where the ability to maintain control, particularly in the Middle East, become hard to manage, and they don't have actors they can easily categorize, then the good old days of the kind of like WASC Anglo-Saxon management of American intelligence really start to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people who are actually managing the donut shop are not the same people anymore. I remember there was one time when we had a conversation, and I remember when Vaughn was here, we were talking about it, is that there are things in terms of international foreign policy and business that a Bush or a Dulles would never do, that you can see a Clinton doing at the drop of a dime. Because the investment in the history of American empire for a WASP who can say my ancestors populated New England, and someone who, but for the grace of the New Deal, is even in American politics, they have a different view of the nation state and the American project.
Oh, for sure.
I think maybe something to think about here is the nature of hegemony, and I'm using hegemony here not just capitalism, because hegemony is something that predates capitalism, probably, unless we're in a truly post-national situation, post-capital as well. Is that hegemony makes you fucking lazy. And you let your own institutions atrophy. You often have to start, your elite becomes so removed from its general society that you have to find new strivers from newly incorporated peoples. And I say that because this is something we see in Rome. This is something you see in the pre-communist Chinese states. This is something you see in Britain, obviously. By the time you get to imperial decadence and Disraeli and all that, you start seeing them pulling outside from outside incorporated peoples. And I think a lot of the I think a lot of what we're about to see that's about to get ugly and kind of unpredictable is I don't think the U.S. is all that invested in Europe anymore. For example, I think we're about to let the UK become a minor business player in the world, so much so that this, that its economic prospects are like to decline rapidly to, say, what we call middle income standards on the world scale. And it's, I think the US is just going to let it happen. And why? I mean, in some ways you can blame post-imperial UK decadence. I mean, and its own farming out of everything to everywhere else. So these are patterns. I love to be specific to capital. We talk about capitalism. I think there's capitalist decadence patterns too that you can add to this. But hegemony in general breeds a fatuous ruling class, elites that serve them that may be super specialized but don't actually understand anything beyond their own technical specializations, if that, and an increasing dependence on usually the military in these scenarios to hold everything together. So I think we're seeing that. But is that anti-imperialism that's happening, or is that just the natural state of like hegemonic empires? I would probably say the latter, but that's just me.
Toussaint, can we address that super chat that was just on the screen?
Sure.
Thank you.
This is from JB. American intelligence blowback goes back to the beginning. There was no golden age. U.S. foreign policy manages these crises via whack-a-mole.
Yeah, it always has.
Thoughts?
And one thing, yeah, certainly I think it's possible to look at the successes of the U.S. intelligence services, and they did have successes, and then ignore the many other intelligent. For every Allende, there's a Bay of Pigs, right?
Right.
So there's that issue.
Go read the Legacy of Ashes. It's like the CIA was not even that competent when it was the OSS. So yeah.
And the other issue is I mean, of course there are more competent and less competent officials. The question is like a unity of purpose within those organizations. They are like any other bureaucratic structure, subject to the same rules that govern bureaucratic structures, which is people are trying to advance their interests. Are often doing things for personal advancement and motivating. Like the military-industrial complex is not like some machine in which there are people plotting American superiority over the world. It's more like a giant box of people all like grifting to get as many new contracts as they can and advance the political agendas, which benefit their country.
So you say this, and this was printed in the Afghanistan papers, and we've mentioned this since those papers came out. We've been talking about this on this show, and it seems like those papers still go unread by many people that are privy to these shows. Maybe because those papers don't get talked about often on these shows. I don't know. What do you think it is, Pascal?
I mean, I don't think it was something that rose to people's imagination. It wasn't really discussed a lot.
Well, can I ask, is it because someone like Mike Gravel didn't read it into the record?
I think it has nothing to do with Gravel reading anything into the record as he did with the.
I heard it made a difference.
I think no one cares.
Yeah, I mean,
people don't care.
I think there's a certain level of cynicism that most people have in terms of beyond being between just trying to pay their bills, send their kids to school, have a nice night with their wife if they have one, life is not easy in the West, particularly in the U.S. It's stressful, it's expensive. It's it's difficult. People are paranoid about everything. about their kids, particularly if you have kids. So,
Yeah,
you know, it takes a certain kind of luxury to be able to indulge in really analyzing these kinds. Not a luxury, that's too much, but most people just don't do it. And I'm not talking about people who are, you know, unintelligent. Most intelligent people, they're not reading the deep dive nuances of foreign policy, world affairs.
I mean, yeah, someone just said rest in peace, Comrade Gravel.
Yeah, but I think we have to deal with like a real like that when Gravel did that in the 70s and with the Pentagon Papers, you have everybody's life was tied up in Vietnam in a way, and to a lesser degree Korea, in a way that was absolutely not the case for the 40 years of war we've had since you know the 70s. There also is a real sense in which the economic world, the whole system in which there was a social compact and workers were weak, but they were at least at the table. And, you know, and they were at the table without even government structures. Like, you know, there's a story to be told about how Fordism actually creates the public-private partnerships that allow for neoliberalism. But there's also a reason where you have to look at the way that the changes in the economy and these wars actually tend to align in a way where you would have thought American life was fundamentally changing when Gravel is reading the Pentagon Papers, and why people were scandalized by shit like Watergate, which even by 1990 standards, when you try to explain to people what that was actually about, they're like, what? Who cares? Everybody does that. But by the time you get to, like, you know, the dirty shenanigans of like Gary Hart or whatever, this stuff has become standard.
Yeah, it's standard, but it's still news and it still tanks campaigns. It did back then, but I think now in the post-Trump reality television world of politics, what will scandalize sorry, I can't, Gene just threw me off. What will scandalize someone now?
I have no idea. All I can tell you is, like, we've been seeing since the 2007 crisis that the ascendancy of neoliberalism as it existed from like 1976 to about, I don't know, 2001. I don't know what happened around 2001. Maybe a thing happened that year.
Small thing.
That economic world and that geopolitical world is over, and we are still dealing with, like, the neoliberal habits are still all around us. Like, Biden isn't creating some new Fordism. I'm not proposing that neoliberalism is over, but we're in a completely different period of it, and it breeds general cynicism. It breeds disengagement, and even people who are highly engaged in politics, as you've said yourself, Jason, and we actually sort of benefit from, like, fuck, it's part of our business model, if we're honest, is a lifestyle brand. And that's because the effect it has on the actual world, whether or not you have 500 people watching your stream or 200 people watching your stream in a country of 320 million. The environment is so totally fractured that it kind of doesn't matter anymore. There is no, like, coherent common culture, and you don't want to speak to coherent common culture. That's the quickest way not to have an audience. Ask NPR. Like,
well, Gene Bajlan, before you finish, Gene Bajlan has to go, and Toussaint has to go. So, Gene, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye, Gene. Clap, 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 degenerates.
Eric Warren just sent the funniest message, and Pascal's
That
face
wasn't Toussaint. That was an imposter. Just so you know.
Should we wrap up now? We've gone for 2 hours, and this is a 2 hour session.
Wrap up.
Let's be done.
We should wrap up. Look.
Are you sure, Warren? Varn got 2 more hours left in him.
Varn can talk. Varn can go for hours and hours and hours
Look,
and hours.
why don't we do this?
Don't let
Why
me.
don't we do this, Derek Varn? Why don't we not stream and we can call each other on our TIR group call since
and talk a lot of shit
on the black one now since Gene and Kuba have segregated the group calls.
Yes, Black Excellence is back in the house where he belongs.
We'll have a black group call and we can have a friendly black group call and we'll just N-words everywhere. Just falling on dropped an N-word.
Not for me. I do not. That does not fall from my mouth.
So this was the most fun I've had in a long time. So I want to thank everybody for watching. If you have anything you disagree with, if you have anything you want to say negatively about anyone on the screen, past or present, please leave a comment. Toussaint loves reading them.
I do. The real Toussaint.
Okay. Last super chat of the day. Can you see it on the screen, Toussaint? My computer's moving slow. Is it on the screen?
It was on the screen. Now it's kind of
Toussaint.
There.
Here is more
Prairie
of my
Fire.
reparations dues. Thank you very much, Prairie Fire.
Thank you, Kowalski.
That's pretty funny.
Our other favorite Polish dude.
Someone says the pew pew episode. I guess pew pew means people were shooting.
There was some shots fired all over the place, particularly in the chat.
Toussaint, you're welcome. I don't know if Varn or Pascal got to read any of my comments, but
oh my god.
I deliberately didn't read that much of the chat because I knew I would challenge everyone to a duel.
No duel.
We were getting close to that.
No duel challenging, Varn. No duel challenging. Thank you guys. We're going to be doing another episode to piss you guys off tomorrow. We're going to air it Saturday. We're going to talk about why Jay-Z and Kanye West are the greatest rappers of all time.
Oh my God.
Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback. Slavery didn't happen. What else are we going to say?
We're going to talk about Rihanna's kids.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about why Rihanna ruined the Super Bowl. What else are we going to say? What else?
We're not talking about
Ronald Reagan, maybe the greatest president of all time.
Oh, my God.
Free Young Thug.
I can't even say that as a joke.
What Haiti got wrong about the revolution? What else? What else are we going to talk about on the Saturday show?
We have Free Young Thug. Hashtag Free Young Thug.
We're talking about hip hop that's good, which is none from this decade.
We're going to talk about why mumble rap is the forgotten genre of greatness.
Hey, man. Lil Baby mumbles when he speaks. It's kind of not his fault.
And also, we're going to throw in at least 20 minutes.
Say Blue-Eyed Soul is the best form of soul. I mean, what are we doing here? How many?
Look, we're gonna have a whole section on why J.K. Rowling is misunderstood.
Oh, fuck Christ. There's a whole podcast about that now. Let's just not touch that.
Are we looking for demonetization, canceling, all the above?
We'll get monetized like crazy on that. But
you won't be monetized by YouTube. You'll just start getting. You'll get certain other kinds of money going your way, I guess.
Yeah.
Mumble rap is black excellence. Somebody said.
Mumble rap is black.
I love it. I love it.
What austerity gets right?
Ronald Reagan, great president or the greatest?
You're just gonna a defense of colonialism.
What else better than that? Better than that? Better than that? The 94 crime bill. Yes.
Greatest thing to ever happen.
Yeah. Why we need more prisons for more Negroes?
Why Joe Biden is the GOAT.
Why Joe Biden is the GOAT. That is what we'll be talking about. Oh, and we're definitely making a new shirt that says Pro NATO on it.
Pro NATO.
Pronatal.
And pronatal. Have some more kids, everybody.
There you go. That is what we're to be. No, we're actually going to be doing a show about De La Soul, actually. So I'm really excited about this show. We'll be doing it with Daniel Monte. I hit up Daniel, and we took us a while to get a date. We tried to do it closer to when Trugo had passed away, but we'll be doing a whole retrospective on the native tongues, 90s hip hop. I'm being serious about this. We're actually
no. I'm actually like, how is De La Soul gonna piss anybody off? That's
no.
Like, it'd be really surprised. A bunch of like De La Soul haters out there.
But if we made
those guys have dates.
If we made the thumbnail De La Soul, but it was just mumble rappers.
Oh,
Pascal likes them.
De La Soul, the SoundCloud rapper of the past. Is that how you're gonna start that? Like...
De La Soul was De La Soul the first ever SoundCloud rapper? Pascal, you're old enough to remember this. Remember when people dissed De La Soul? Old hip hop heads were like, "This is trash."
Absolutely.
This young people hip hop shit is stupid. Remember when Robert Townsend?
They thought it was soft. They called them soft.
Yeah,
because they had daisies.
Barn and Jason are also paid NAFO trolls. I think NAFO is Black NATO.
Oh.
Or it could be a relative of mine.
Oh boy.
There's some in-jokes that your chat has that I don't get. Like, I just want to say
we don't get them either.
This is why I'm the sometimes why of this situation, because clearly, like, I'm like, I don't get like 3/4 of the in-jokes. But it may just be because I don't actually have a sense of humor. Like,
you are 3/4 of the in-jokes. Come on, man. Black excellence. Black History Month. We got it.
Wait, is this the last Black History Month day?
No, Black History Month
is
the 28th, man.
Wait, what day is it?
It's only the 23rd.
The 23rd, man.
You're trying to make
How
5 whole days.
Today is W.D. Du Bois' birthday.
Yeah.
PMC said TIR NAFO shirt is a bridge to.
Who is NAFO? Your play cousin?
NAFO. Pascal, what does NAFO stand for?
Niggas ain't fucking around. I don't know.
Wait, what the O be? O round? Niggas ain't fucking around. Niggas ain't fucking Oscar. How about that? No. Niggas ain't fucking.
NAFO is a Twitter thing.
Is it Twitter? Is it? Are you making that up?
Somebody said that in the chat. NAFO is a Twitter thing.
What does it stand for? I like O round. I think Pascal is right.
The North Atlantic Fellas Organization.
The North Atlantic Fellas?
Fellows?
Or felons?
So
the North Atlantic Felons Organization? Oh man, is that a new word for Negroes?
A counter. No. It's a counter Russian propaganda and disinformation campaign that NAFO OFAN.
I like Pascal's definition better.
Yeah, this is gross, man.
Verify how child labor can solve childhood abuse.
You shouldn't laugh because I think that's coming.
Virtuoso, thank you for the super chat. Drill rap is the new punk rock. Discuss.
Pascal will be heading up that episode.
That's all Pascal.
Pascal likes drill rap.
So from now on, NAFO stands for niggas ain't fucking around. That's what
O-round.
O-round.
Oh yeah.
Like, hey, NAFO. Like once you say that, it's like, oh, it's getting serious in here. He just NAFO'd the whole room.
Every one of them.
Sorry.
All right. Well, that makes it sound like there's a black contingency of the Azov battalion. So on that note, we should probably end.
Black ass off.
Black ass off. Fucking his black ass off.
Ukraine clan ain't nothing to fuck with.
I feel like, there's a Mr. Show sketch about this for those of us who are fucking Gen Xers or something. All right.
There's someone that should never gave you people a channel.
I just saw someone say ADOS Azov, and I'm like, I'm stepping out. Like,
Pascal has to wait on the Meg versus Ice Spice debate.
Anyway, on that note,
yeah, let's end.
All right, yeah. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. This has been the funniest ending of a show not in the champagne room ever.
That's true. On that note.
Oh. All right. Can't wait to see the TIR Twitter. Peace, y'all.
Peace.